Welcome, I'm your host, Jules DeVito, and you're listening to the Highly Sensitive Human Podcast, the show that offers an insight into the world of the highly sensitive person and helps those who identify with the traits of high sensitivity to feel more empowered and resilient without denying their authentic gifts. So welcome, Peter. Thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
Thank you. Thanks, Jules. Appreciate you having me on. Great to catch up and be able to converse these deep aspects of what we do. So I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation and finding out more about the work that you do and how it relates to high sensitivity as well. So I know that you're a Hermetic practitioner and you've been on quite a long journey with the work that you do today. So I'd love to hear more about your story. So how did you get into the work that you're doing currently? And then we can go more into what that work is.
Yeah, so I suppose to get to this work for me is my own personal life journey, I suppose, is the best way to describe it. And, you know, for I'd say probably the first 30, 35 years of my life was probably just really heavy, dark, miserable, a lot of suffering and misery, we'll say. And I think that was really the catalyst that got me to a point where I just needed to do something, or to take the reins somehow and to do something drastic to make some kind of a change. And so it was really that kind of darkness that got me to a point of, I suppose, looking for my own inner healing work to create more balance in my own system. And that's how it started, really, was just coming to the work to try help myself to try get out of this heaviness that I was kind of always feeling all my life. And then as I just kind of got into that and I started to find myself more and more, and I started to understand myself a lot more, and I also started to understand a lot of my past a lot more, and the journey that kind of got me to here. And there's so much more. I mean, it has reawakened so much information within me as well, of aspects that I've kind of been interested in my entire life as well. And that was really kind of what got me to it. And then as I just continued my own work, I started to find myself a lot more and to become a lot more aware of who I actually am. And that led me, I suppose, deeper on that path of my own inner healing and work on myself, to then align me to really reawaken what I have myself to be able to share with other people, which is kind of into this line of work as well, with my own personal approach. So it's really just my own journey of my own difficulties, really, that brought me back to myself, which opened up I suppose you could say, my purpose, which is now what I give back to other people.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And I'm interested to hear more about that suffering aspect of your journey. That's something that really fascinates me in terms of how that can be a catalyst towards awakening or towards becoming a healer for others. So before we go into that, what is the work that you offer today? So I know that you have a mystery school and there's many different aspects of your work. So yeah, would you be able to explain a bit about that for the listeners?
Yeah, I'm gonna try break this down. It's quite a vast thing, but we'll try to synopsize, I suppose, a little bit. But for me, the work that I do, I mean, as a Hermetic practitioner, so Hermeticism is a very, very ancient and sacred. It's a philosophy. It's also a practice. It's also a science. You could say it's a lot of different things, and it's very much based on a lot of very ancient, we'll say, sages or mystics, what they discovered about what this experience is of life or consciousness or life, whatever you want to call it. Different words we can use for it. Mm-hmm. And it's using very, very ancient methods and modalities, basically, to really understand the universe. Because I'll try not to go too deep on this just right yet, but like we have this existence, all of us here in the material plane, which our consciousness is essentially located on the material plane, which is a physical plane, things that we can see and touch and feel. And that's it's like a pixel of what the total of what existence really is, of what does exist. You know, there's obviously a lot more that exists that's non-tangible or non-physical. And Hermeticism is again, through your own inner work, and again, this is where the sensitivity comes in of your own system, is you start to be able to fine-tune yourself to reading the fields of conscious energy, we'll say, that go much deeper or much beyond the surface of the material plane. Then through an understanding with that, it's hard to put this into words, but through a deep understanding of wisdom and experience and application, and also alignment with yourself, which is as a measuring field, the human body basically, which is what the sensitivity really picks up, is you can start to read much beyond the surface of things. So from a Hermetic approach, there's sacred laws in Hermeticism that operate the entire universe, basically, that have been unveiled, we'll say, throughout history, going back over tens of thousands of years by different sages or mystics or wise men or sages throughout time. Basically, I would have discovered this because they created union with something higher than themselves, basically, and it's something that's known as Gnosis. When we achieve that level of divine wisdom, it's something that comes through you. It's not so much like that you're reaching for something. It's actually you are getting yourself into a state of stillness where something actually comes through you. And
Mm,
it's in that divinity and in that union, then is where I'm able to decipher what's kind of going on, because I kind of see with my mind. I work off the mental plane, we'll say, because I've gotten myself into a place now where I'm a lot more stable in myself, and I'm able to use that sensitivity of my own system to read much deeper into the conscious field of energy. And so then what I'll do is I'm able to come back and decipher what's going on, we'll say, in people's day-to-day lives. Because
mm,
what happens in our day-to-day lives is surface, it's material level. Oh, this happened to me or that happened to me. But the information is much deeper at the conscious level as to why it happened to you, what guidance that's given you, where it's trying to take you, what it's trying to show you. So in a nutshell, that's kind of the approach that I have, but I use different ways of doing it in different modalities, basically. And the language that's behind that, I suppose, just to touch on, would be the language of symbolism, because the entire universe or this entire experience is symbolic. Everything is symbolic. And then
mm.
symbols have a conscious language. They are a conscious language that are not just the surface, but what is encased within that symbol, which is then where we can find the direction of either for myself or for a client, we'll say. So it's quite vast, but it's also really, really pristine and clean in the direction and the guidance.
Yeah, fascinating. And I'm curious, is there a particular technique which you've drawn upon to have this wisdom work through you? So the gnosis you speak about, a lot of people talk about meditation, shamanism, a particular practice, or for you, is it a combination of many approaches and techniques, or simply the experiences you've had in life?
Yeah, so I'd say more so like around the practices, I think it's more a variety.
Mm,
And that kind of is really the approach with the work. Like let's just say, for example, to touch back on Hermeticism. The thing with Hermeticism is Hermeticism doesn't exclude anything. So
right.
basically, I don't just take, we say, the physical reality, like what we say what physics does in science, and like they're the laws of the physical reality, but they
Mm-mm.
will not apply, we'll say, when you go beyond, we'll say, the material realm, or if you go into the astral plane or the mental plane, those physical laws don't apply there because it's not a physical realm, we'll say. So Hermeticism is all inclusive. It takes into consideration the entirety of the universe, including what you can see and feel, the conscious energies that exist, all different aspects, and things that we'll say as a human will say super sensitized can read, which is not going to be physical things. We can read deeper
Right.
into the field of energy. And so Hermeticism is all inclusive. And so what Hermeticism takes you back to is the fact that this entire conscious experience is one thing. So there's no separation between me or you or the table or the cup, we'll say, at a conscious level. We were all inside this conscious construct. And because everything is kind of the one thing, it means that there's so many different modalities that we can use. It's like they say
Mm,
that the saying of there's many paths to the mountaintop. So for me, I use many different modalities. So like meditation, absolutely. I have shamanic practices that I work. Shamanic journey is one practice that I would use, we'll say, quite a lot. That would be one that I'd use quite deeply, especially
right.
with science, because I can get people onto that astral realm where you take out their conscious side. So it's just raw, pure, divine information that comes through the system.
Mm,
And then with the language of symbolism, I'm able to decipher that. But I kind of combine a whole manner of different approaches and different cultures, because what I've seen over my years, because I've been studying this stuff all my life, is that you just change the lens, and each culture is talking about the exact same thing. They might
right.
use different language, but underneath it, that conscious level, it's the same conscious information that's being shared. So everything is just designed to get us to the one place. So
Mm.
I'll just align with what I'm more aligned with. A certain practice I won't use because maybe I don't feel aligned to it. But anything that I feel in alignment with, that I can really get the nuggets of information from, I apply it in my work.
Mm, absolutely. I really resonate with what you're saying. And I'm curious how this relates to high sensitivity. So I've understood for a long time that those of us who are highly sensitive, my experience is that we're more able to tap into this wisdom that you're talking about, and we're more sensitive to those subtle planes of consciousness and existence. And as you're talking, I'm noticing that I resonate with what you're saying, and I seem to have this inner wisdom, this inner knowing of what you're talking about. And I felt like that since I was a child. I've always felt that I'm aware of subtle dimensions of reality that other people are not. And as you said earlier, it's hard to put into words. I sometimes find it hard to find language for it. But I'm curious if you have a sense of, this podcast is all about highly sensitive people and how sensitivity relates to this gnosis or this spiritual way of being in the world.
Yeah, and I suppose just to go into the highly sensitive part of that
Yeah.
sensitivity part, I'm going to need to go back a little bit. Uh,
Yeah. Great.
and like for me, like I found with this journey of life and getting to know yourself, I mean, that's one of the main mantras of the ancient mystery schools is, man, know thyself, like human, know thyself, which was to know yourself as deep as you possibly can, to know
Mm,
who you are and your position in this greater expanse and, how to navigate it. And so obviously with the work, I've learned a lot more about myself as I go forward that I can kind of, look back on my life and understand myself and my past now much better, we'll say, from my present. And what I really realized is the fact of what was a lot of that misery that I talk about, or that darkness, we'll say, was because I was reading in so much energy. I was so sensitive that I was picking up so much that it used to overwhelm me. And I've always been super active in my mind, which has nearly drove me insane for most of my life. And this work has given me a lot more stability in my mind now that I'm able to attune to that sensitivity. Like before, it was like an overwhelm. It was like too much information coming through.
mm,
Whereas this work has given me a lot more stability in myself, whereas I can now, and again, even with the body as well, being able to attune to my own body to be able to read these frequency or this sensitivity, I suppose, that's coming into my system. Because before I couldn't make sense of it. It was just, it was everything was coming too much, we'll say, which I realize in hindsight. But now it's become my greatest gift, is because exactly like what you said is, outside the material realm, outside what we can actually with the five senses kind of understand or relate to, there's so much more information. There's way more information that's happening outside the material realm than in the material. The material realm is finite, it's in a box, but outside of it, we're gone into the infinity.
mm,
So it really is that sensitivity that allows me to pick up that wisdom, because the body reads it, and it's an attunement of the body with all these senses to be able to understand the different frequencies that come through, and then understanding to make, we'll say, conscious sense of it as well. So that for me has been through having that sensitivity, but obviously the work to read that sensitivity has been, we'll say, the inner work for myself, we'll say.
mm,
But exactly as you described, I mean, like it's anything that happens outside the material realm is very hard to describe in words. It's exactly as you said, it is that inner knowing. There's information, because it's information. I mean, the five senses in the physical realm is it's how we navigate our experience of life on the physical sense.
right.
So, but there's a lot more that happens outside the physical sense. So to fine tune the sensitivity of the body is to be able to understand what's happening outside the physical realm, if that makes sense. So you're kind of getting a more total picture of what life is, because what I've found with my own journey as well is, a lot of the things that I battled with over the years was just a lack of understanding.
Mm,
Lack of understanding was a lot to do with the lack of my awareness, and the lack of awareness was the lack of attunement to what this sensitivity was picking up. So as I could start to read and understand it more, I could understand what was actually this experience was more. I could understand why things were happening, and I could understand that it wasn't something was happening against me, that it was actually, this was something else that was trying to take me somewhere, or show me something, or to direct me someplace. So that sensitivity has really helped me to understand the much greater picture of what's happening, rather than that small window that I was living in before. And so it's
mm.
given me much more freedom in life. It's allowed me to expand, to step into who I am as well, because I can understand myself more, because I just thought there was something wrong with me.
Right. Yeah.
Whereas
Right.
now it's like, okay, there's a purpose, there's a reason for this, and this makes perfect sense. So rather than me holding myself back and making myself smaller, it allowed me to really grow and to expand into who I can be.
Yeah. And I've also experienced that a lot of highly sensitive people relate to the wounded healer archetype, or what you're speaking about, having this deep sensitivity and often being overwhelmed by information they're receiving, or being able to tap into deep suffering in the world as well. Or a lot of highly sensitive people have had very traumatic childhoods that they've been more impacted by because of their sensitivity. And so I'm really fascinated by these struggles that highly sensitive people go through, the traumas, the dark nights of the souls, deep depression, things like that. But my understanding is that these are catalysts. These are things that can help us to break open and actually come to a place which I think you're speaking about now. You're at this place of being grounded, being able to receive this wisdom, being able to share it with others. So you've stepped into the archetype of the healer or the sage, let's say. So do you have any advice on that, or what's your experience of that turning point? How do we turn the suffering into becoming healers? Which
Yeah,
I know is a big question.
yeah. Yeah, and like it's a valid question. It's an important question as well, because I mean it is, and I do find that like suffering or darkness is the catalyst to that change. Um, and yeah, I mean, I suppose for me in my own personal journey, is as I said, it was probably. I mean, I've been doing this inner work of know thyself probably most of my life, because I've always deep in the mind and analysis and aspects, but I didn't have an understanding as to what was happening. But I just think that there was so much darkness and that happened
Mm.
that it pushed me to a point of, that make or break point.
Right.
I mean, I've been in prison. I've been through addictions most of my life as well. Like that's a lot of, and I understand now looking back that a lot of my addictions were me to be able to deal with that overwhelm of what I was actually picking up with
Right.
positivity. But I've ended up in a lot of dark places. But I suppose exactly as you said, it was just a lot of those dark places. As I was getting older and more mature, kind of pushed me to points of like, where I was becoming more aware of the environments I was in. Was like it's either going to be this forever, and it's obviously going to get worse, or you're going to have to do something here. And that's an overwhelming point to be at. Like I think for anybody, no matter what your story is, because it's like the comfort is to keep going what you're used to, even though you don't like it. It's horrible, it's miserable, but you're so used to it that you can almost how to deal with it. And obviously, to change means to do something you've never done before. And as human, that's one of the most difficult things that we do.
Mm.
Um, but I mean, the one thing I suppose for me is if I could give advice to anybody, is the fact of like what I've learned is that there's information in everything. There's a solution in everything. There's a really is. And I know when people when you feel overwhelmed with stuff that you just don't see that there's any way out. It just because you're in that point yourself, but it's a very singular individual point. And I know when you get to that point, you just feel like nobody can understand you, or you feel that there'd be judgment if I was to share something or whatever. But what I found is once you actually take that first step, and I do think that we have to take the first step. Like energy is reciprocal. Like we're not going to receive unless we give, and what
Mm.
we give is what we give to ourselves. Is like I'm going to take that decision to do something better for me. I need to, whether, no, it doesn't matter how big or how small that could be. It could be something like changing your diet, or maybe I go for a walk a couple of times a day. Just as long as you start and do something that's going to improve you, doors will open, people will
Mm.
show up. And just to kind of put yourself out there. So I mean, I think that starting point is probably the most difficult, because you have a habit of this darkness. You have a habit of this way, and when you have that, I think it's very hard to get your mind outside of that state to think that there is anything else. Or I know for me, I often just thought like, well, this is just the hand I'm dealt. This is the life I have. So it's just, this is what it is. Some people seem to have luckier lives than others, and that was the misconception I had when I was younger, I suppose, from a lack of awareness. And now I understand that it's no, it's like you create, everybody creates, you create the life that you want. You're dealt a hand. And what I've discovered in this work as well is sometimes the more difficult a hand that you're dealt with is because you need that difficulty to really birth that greatness that's in you, or that light. I don't mean greatness is in better than anybody, but just as in your own personal greatness, as to what you are. Without that challenge, you might never be able to achieve it.
Right, absolutely. And as you're talking, I'm reflecting back on my journey, and definitely it was my struggles and my suffering especially in my teenage years, that led me to reach out to Buddhism. That was the start of my journey, learning about Buddhism, going on meditation retreats, Vipassana retreats. Um, and I don't think I would possibly, I wouldn't have gone down that path if it wasn't for my suffering and my struggles. I think I would have just plodded along being quite comfortable with life, probably, maybe, I'm not sure. But there was definitely something which sparked in me this desire to seek out knowledge and truth. And it reminds me of what you said earlier, that knowledge is so valuable because it helps us realize we're not alone as well. So finding other people who've had similar experiences and learning from each other. And it reminds me of your mystery school. So I know that you have a school, and I'm wondering, what is it that this school offers people in terms of that knowledge or that sense of knowing they're not alone?
Yeah, so the mystery school is, I mean, I suppose for me with my own stories, I since I was about 5 or 6, I've been studying. I say studying, but I mean it was just obviously an interest at that age. You know,
Mm,
since that age, I've always been studying, we'll say, ancient cultures. I've always felt that there was something a lot more pure in the ancient cultures than what we have. Like we have all this modern technology, but for me, it's messy. You
mm,
know, we are the technology, and I just that was the difference. What I saw with the ancients
mm,
was that, and I've been kind of cultivating this kind of my entire life, and I was always drawn to like the seeker of truth, I suppose, is the easiest way of putting it. You know, when you
mm,
look back in ancient times and all the great philosophers that we were familiar with were all initiates of the mystery schools, and this is where these schools of consciousness is what they really were. And I've always been drawn to it and interested in it. Also thinking the fact that I've also missed the boat because we're modern times that doesn't really exist, but it does exist, and it's of course it's in the ether anyway. We can attune to it,
right.
but I've always had an interest in it. But obviously, as I went deeper in this work, I received message, like I get information comes through to me a lot when I'm connected, we'll say. And about 7 years ago, I was told with this work that I was supposed to bring a revival of an ancient mystery schools. And about 7 years ago, just to be really clear, where I was at myself personally was I couldn't even be in front of a camera. I couldn't speak. I'd never want to be seen. That's one of the biggest shadows that I have that I'm trying to overcome, incrementally. So even the thoughts of that, what I just did is, okay, fair enough. That goes back there. And I just focused on me. I just kept doing my own inner work, which I do anyway. And then the time kind of came where I was feeling the pressure. Has been told the school had to be brought, we say, last year. And I had a kind of a big blockage around, because it's very sacred information that's been shared through this. It's information that's gained through, inner work and, creating a baseline in that sensitivity to be able to understand it and to read it. And
Mm,
so you don't want this information to be given in the wrong hands, that it could be used, which it has been done, to manipulate people and to control people. You want it to be used for what it's for, which is the upraising of collective consciousness for humanity, basically. And so anyway, that kind of came to a head and I had to launch the school. So I did a kind of like a beta run, we'll say, of a platform for about 6 months before the actual school, to kind of see because I create a lot of things in my mind to see the structure. Would it work? Would it do what I needed it to do? And it did. So the school came then about, and I launched it just last month. So May 18th, I
mm,
launched the school. And so it brings in all these ancient modalities and philosophies. And it's not so much other people's philosophy, but it's about learning about philosophy, your own philosophy, how to move your mind in different ways to see things from different perspectives of these particular ancient modalities. And these ancient modalities are modalities that were designed of ways of navigating consciousness, which means navigating beyond this physical experience, and ways that we can understand what's happening that would validate and back up experiences outside the physicality, we'll say. And so there's many different modalities. Again, going back to that thing, I don't kind of say one thing, because if I bring in many different modalities, they all give a different and a clearer lens on the one thing that we're looking at. So
right.
all these in through different ways, breaking it down. And then obviously with my own work through consciousness, I use different methods to understand the symbolism of what consciousness is speaking. So it's a process of augury, which is what's known as prophecy in another language. I don't really like the term prophecy because it sounds like it's something woo-woo or out there, where
Right.
it's actually a scientific approach that you're reading conscious energy. And so the school teaches people these modalities that they apply in themselves. So it's not so much that I'm telling people something and take it verbatim from me, because if that was the case, I could just give people a list of books to read. So it's
Right.
about, I take them through this journey over 12 months. So it's a 12-month commitment in the school. And I bring in and I teach these ancient modalities, a lot of esoteric wisdom, occult wisdom. these sacred practices. And then I also bring in guidance, we'll say monthly, weekly, and daily, backing this up and seeing how this conscious energy could show up in your day-to-day life. So what it really is there's a teaching, there's a learning of consciousness, of understanding the greater expanse of what the universe is, bringing in all these ancient modalities and Hermeticism, but also it's a companion to your life throughout the 12 months. So obviously in life over 12 months, life has a pendulum swing, it's up and down, and that's what life is, that's the acceptance of life. But with the school as a companion, the school now allows you to see the events in your life at a much, much deeper level, which means you can navigate deeper into what's happening in your life, which means that you're going to have massive shifts in consciousness. So that's kind of in a nutshell the way that the school works. Hard to put it into words exactly because of the type of kind of aspects it is. But for me, this ancient and sacred wisdom, because it's thousands and thousands of years backed up by some of the greatest minds that have ever existed, because they've done their work and have achieved, we'll say, great states. So when people start to feed in this information, because at a soul level, it makes perfect sense. There's a resonance to it, so that you can kind of align to it. And what it does is it kind of shifts that version of reality that we have, which is the material version, which is trapped in this square box, limitation and what have you. And what it does is it through person's own realizations of what's happening and seeing it mirrored in their own life, is they will actually blow out the walls of that square into the greater experience, which means that they can start to move out of the limitation of the material existence into the expansion of what is really available for them.
Amazing. It sounds fascinating. And what you're saying is it's very experiential in that way. So it's about embodying this wisdom rather than just learning the knowledge from a book. So that sounds really exciting. It's something someone can actually experience, an expansion in their consciousness. So it's really a journey they're going on. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And it is like, because you need experience. I mean, as you said, that word embodiment is so important, because like consciousness is a hard thing to kind of even to discuss or to explain, because we're constantly shifting through stages of consciousness, and it does take embodiment, and that is the big difference, because otherwise it's just from the head, or it's not really fully in the system, and it's a big difference.
Yeah, absolutely. And you said it opened last month. So can people join throughout the year, or is there a particular date that you want people to join the school?
Yeah, so it's open constantly. So the way that the school runs is, it's not so much that it has a beginning that you have to join it at the beginning. So it's a constant flux, because what I do is I read a lot of the conscious symbolism that's available at different levels, to be able to see, because this is what augury is. Augury is the reading of symbols. Augury was an ancient practice that's not really understood too well in modern times, because we think, oh, like, well, not everybody, but a lot of people think that the ancients were lesser evolved than what we are, but I would actually see it the opposite. And so they think this thing about augury was all like reading the signs of, we'll say, starlings in the sky, or the entrails of birds and things like this. No, I don't read the entrails of birds or anything like that, but it's everything is symbolic. The entire universe is symbolic. So you can read how things happen. You can even read into the collective. You can look on social media. You can see symbolically what turns up. So I use that as a means of seeing what's going to come. And so you kind of have an idea what energy consciously is going to come in say, a particular week or month. And so you're able to guide those members of the school into it much deeper. And so it's going by the energy of any given time. So there isn't exactly a beginning to the school or an end. It's a constant running school. The only thing is I was told that the limit for the school is 33. I'm not supposed to take any more than 33 participants at any given time. So at the moment, I think I still have about 8 spaces left on the school, but anyone can join at any time. It just means that from the date that you join, it's a 12-month commitment from then.
Right.
But
Okay.
kind of an open, kind of an on-running school, if that makes sense.
It makes sense. Yeah. And I love the fact that it's not based on one particular religion. It's not dogmatic in that way. And I think that appeals a lot to highly sensitive people, because I have a lot of people telling me they're spiritual, but they're not religious, or they have this spiritual awareness, but they don't want to associate with a particular religion as such. And I think this school is exactly, speaking to that, right? Because it's drawing on that indigenous wisdom rather than the modern day religions which are more, dogmatic.
Yeah. It's interesting you even use that word dogmatic, because it's a word that I kind of highlight a lot in that school, about like how,
Right.
and highlight how we have been living in a dogmatic reality, and
Mm.
it's just it's the shadow of humanity. It's not like to say it's intention. It's just the shadow that's not dealt with inside is going to manifest outside, and that's just the shadow of humanity, how it has come, like, and exactly like you said, like religion, I use religious texts because they're sacred texts, but it's not like this. But I will
Yes.
show you that religious text will say if it's Christian or if it's Buddhist or whatever. But I'll show you that how it comes through in a cult reading or an esoteric, because everything is the one thing. And exactly like
Right.
what you said, that's what really helps it to sit in the system, is the fact that it's not just one approach says this. I'll
Mm.
show 16 other approaches that say the exact same thing, because it's all embedded, it consciously will say. And that's what really helps people to absorb it, is the fact that, like, oh, look, maybe if it's validated by 16 or 17 different approaches, well, then it kind of validates yourself almost, like, and that
True.
really keeps that box open, which, because we don't
Mm.
want that rigidity. We don't want to be put in the box. The box is necessary at times to analyze and understand what's in front of us. But when we understand it, we have to blow the walls out again so that we can grow and expand. But dogma is really a tight, contained box. So we have to
Right.
make sure that we're constantly open to new information. And there's a theory or a philosophy from here that could back up this, or could take my
Mm.
mind here. And the other aspect as well is the fact that, like, with this work, and is to be always prepared for the fact that everything that you think to be real could shatter at any given time, because
Mm.
multiple times in the journey. So so that it kind of prevents you from staying in that dogma, to think that maybe what I know now is everything. I'm all
Right.
hoping that in the afternoon my reality could shatter again.
Mm. Right. Yeah. So letting go of that attachment to one
Yeah,
belief system or one truth.
yeah,
Mm.
yeah, absolutely.
So I know that you've written a couple of books as well, The Phoenix Birth and The Saturated Breath.
Mm.
And I'm curious more about your writing. What do these books talk about? And I'm assuming they relate to everything you've been speaking about already, but it'd be great to hear more about the books.
Yeah, so the Phoenix Birth was my first book that I wrote um during COVID, actually. So I don't know, I'm not too sure when it was, maybe 2021 or 2022, maybe,
Mm.
when I released it. But and both books are poetry. And
Mm.
so I used to write poetry when I was probably maybe 12 or 13, I think. A lot of
Right.
very, very, very dark, dark, dark stuff, we'll say.
Mm.
But it was cathartic for me at the time, because it was like a kind of an outlet, we'll say. And I hadn't wrote for years. I kind of went away from, because obviously I got very lost in the addiction for quite a few years as well. And when I kind of started to come back to this deep inner work with myself, um, I kind of started to write again a little bit. And so both books are charter my own journey, basically. And obviously I've quite an analytical mind. I've quite a deep mind. And again, with that sensitivity, is trying to take in so much information and deciphering it. So anything that I go through, I analyze quite deeply. I see things extremely deeply. And I have a way that I express myself is true. I just naturally express through symbols. And symbols are expressions of consciousness. And so the poetry that I write, so if I go through a particular process, we'll say, um, because I'm so very deep analytical with my mind, as I understand, and again, I'm also reading how the sensitivity of my own body in these processes as well. And so what I do is, when I come out the other side of a process, a particular piece that I'm working on to heal or bring back into balance, when I'm finished, I write it. And it's also a process. I know when I'm out the other side as well, because I don't force myself to write ever.
Mm.
I always write from a channel state where I'm not really forcing anything. I'll have
Right.
like an idea of what I'm writing about. I have the concept. So if I go through a particular process, I know what I've kind of just worked on. So that might be in my mind of what I'm going to write about. And then I just let it go. And so what I do is I charter in really deep, detailed, consciously, because I write in symbolism, what I've been going through, how I went through it, what it looked like, how it felt like, and coming out the other side. And so each book, even though they're at different stages. I mean, the first book, we say, The Phoenix Birth, is comes in the element of fire, because it was about that first stage of the journey where you're kind of burning off the dross on the surface, if I use kind of alchemical terms here.
Mm.
And like, you're kind of aware of the surface stuff. You kind of know the bad habits that we have at that stage when you come to the deep work first. I know that I shouldn't be that way. I know I get angry and I'm quite a snappy person, or I get triggered by this or that. And so you kind of, you start to burn off all that dross. And obviously it's still quite difficult, deep work. And so the first book probably takes me through a period of maybe 3 or 4 years work. And then the second book, The Saturated Breath, comes in the element of water. And I went with water and the saturated breath because once you kind of remove the surface layer of that dross, then you're coming into the much more deeper unconscious layers where you don't know what you're working on. It's completely unconscious. And so the expression in the poems, we'll say in the second book, are much, much deeper. A lot deeper because again, you're really navigating the deep waters of the unconscious to see what really is in me that shows up on the surface that makes me show up this way. And it highlights parts as well that you wouldn't be aware of until you take off the other layers, until you get deeper into yourself, you can't really access those.
Right.
So the books are really like, they charter my own journey, but they're really, what they are is they're a guide for anybody in this work. Because I write in symbolism, you're not really getting my verbatim story. The symbols will activate the reader's subconscious because symbols are conscious representations. And when I write, you see, I charge everything because I work at a conscious level. So if I use a certain word or use a certain combination of words, because that for me is I'm in the essence of what I'm trying to convey. So that's for me is when I'm in that challenge state, I'm really in the essence of, I'm in the feeling, the complete feeling sensation in my body of what it is I'm conveying through my mind, through that pen. So basically everything kind of comes out then into it. So it's an act of magic, really, is a way to describe it. That's what magic is it's the use of energy. So I bring my emotional energy, the experiential energy that I've gone through these things or these processes, and then I poetically put it out through symbolic language. So even though it is my story, when you read it, you get your own story because it's a symbolic language that will really activate in your own subconscious mind. So you will see those symbols, what are pertinent to you right now from where you're at versus maybe where I'm at when I actually wrote it.
Yeah, beautiful.
That's like,
Yeah, it's incredible. And I'm curious, do you have any more books coming up then? Because you spoke about the fire, the water, the next stages in the journey.
yeah, well, I'd like to do the series of the four elements and maybe even go into the quintessence as well. But I'm kind of just go where I'm followed. So I haven't kind of wrote too much in a while, but I always have kind of stuff there, and I kind of go where I'm called. I actually have other books that I'm really being called to write at the moment, but again, that'll come in its own time when I create enough space that I have, I can maybe step back and give myself maybe 8 or 12 months to engulf myself in a deep philosophical book. But yeah, there's definitely more to come, but just not just yet.
Not yet, yeah. And I love what you're saying because it's reminding me of, a lot of sensitive people, we tend to know things beyond the cognitive, rational way of thinking that we've been taught we have to know, or we have to express ourselves through. And I find a lot of us can struggle with language or that rational linear thinking. And we need to, find other ways to express ourselves. And that's what you're talking about. And also being vessels. I've also experienced that, when I was younger, I used to write poetry too. And I did it from a place of suffering, but I also felt I was channeling something beyond myself. It wasn't coming from me. It was something coming through me. But, I find Western contemporary society tells us there's something wrong with us, or that's not a rational way of knowing or being, right? And I feel you're talking about acknowledging there are other ways of knowing and expressing ourselves, and how valid that is as well.
Yeah, I know, absolutely. I mean, that goes back, I think, for me, like going like that sensitivity side is why I was in so much suffering. Is because I didn't understand. Again,
Right.
like exactly what you said. Society tries to conform us into this box, and like if you don't fit in that box, life is going to be quite difficult. And so, I'm not saying like this is an individual oppression. I don't mean that. I just mean this is just how the collective has just shown up at this stage in humanity. We'll say you're in shadow. Not trying to say that people are trying to make us this or that, but it's just, if you don't fit in that box, the life can be a little bit different or difficulty. And if you don't fit in that box, sometimes it's very hard to find the guidance for how you show up in the world. So like that sensitivity, when I was younger, there was nobody to really explain that to me, as that this is what this is. It was like, you don't fit in how everybody else is. So, it kind of leaves you on the outside a bit and kind of struggling. but yeah, it's been that journey to just really find, again, it's about really finding who you are, because we're all different. I'm not supposed to be like the next person. You're not supposed to be like the next person. But if I try to be like you, I'm going against who I'm supposed to be, and that's never going to feel right, and it's never going to even be flow. It's never going to feel natural. It's going to have a lot of resistance in me, and the amount of energy I'm going to have to put in to try to be something that I'm not, because
Right.
society says this is what everybody else is, or whatever. So for me, that sensitivity has been that driving force for me, is to really get me into those states, is because the more I had to start to embrace myself, as I was saying earlier on about like the doing some of the deep inner work, and I had to start to embrace myself, to fine tune me, to start
Mm.
to kind of navigate life through my terms, rather than trying
Right.
to fit into the box of what society said, or whatever. And when I started to do that and accept myself a lot more, and accept, we'll say, my weirdness,
Mm.
or whatever it might be, that I started to kind of feel a lot more wholesome in myself, and I started to trust myself a lot more, and I started to have a lot more of these divine experiences, or gnosis, we'll say, is because I was aligning back with myself, that I was able to kind of, if you become more yourself, you're going to become more whole in everything, in every experience that you have. So it was kind of like a combination of that journey, but I needed to have that struggle, to know that I needed to
Right.
come in and do that, even though I didn't always know exactly what I was doing. I was just following some kind of a path that led me where I was supposed to be anyway, if that makes sense.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
And the
And I
journey
love, sorry.
the journey continues.
Exactly. It continues. Yeah. And I love what you're saying, because also with highly sensitive people, I like to encourage people to not become too attached to the label, because we're all sensitive. So we all have this depth of processing. We all have deep empathy. We're very sensitive to the world around us, sensitive to subtle energies and things like that. So we all share that in common, but we all have our unique soul purpose. And that's what I also like to encourage people to tap into. So, what is our individual calling in life? And it is different for everyone. So, even though, yes, we all might fall into this framework of sensitivity, it's not a box. It's not, oh, we're all the same and we all have the same purpose. So, I think that's really important to emphasize
Yeah.
that, yeah, it's about finding our unique soul calling in life.
Yeah, exactly. Because I mean, that sensitivity is your personal language, really, like, isn't it? When you think
Right.
of it, exactly as you said, it's not about like everyone needs to be in that box, but if you follow that sensitivity, and if you work on it to really, to meet it, so that
Mm,
you can actually read it, excuse me, like that is your personal language
mm,
of, exactly as you said, to your purpose, and we are all here differently. We might do similar things, but if I try to do it the way you do it, I'm never going to be able to do it the way that I could do it. But
right.
then all my time and energy goes chasing somebody else in the way they do something, rather than
Mm,
trying to find my own way. And like, it's not to say, like I always say to people about, we'll say, practices as an example. You know, like there's a lot of practice I would have studied in shamanic work, we'll say, that I don't even go near, because I just don't align with it. It doesn't speak to me that way. Then there's
mm,
other practices I've learned from people, and I do them, but then I put my own twist in them, because I connect into it in maybe a little bit different way,
right.
bring in my own personality. But that's true, that sensitivity is, because if I try to fit myself into the box of how I was shown, well, then I'm trying to copy how somebody else did something.
Mm,
And I mean, that's the case no matter who you are. I mean, exactly. I mean, everybody, I do feel, has that the sensitivity. Some people, it might be more peaked than others in different ways, or whatever. But everybody has a sensitivity of their own system that will guide
right.
them to where they need to be. I mean, it might be hard to decipher that in the beginning, because it can be quite heavy and dense as you're first taking your first steps, we'll say. But there's many different modalities out there. There's many different types of practitioners that are there to help people and guide them through how they've walked their own path, that can maybe help you as well. So there definitely is ways and means to
Mm,
align, and to actually come back into yourself, and to start to read yourself better.
yeah, beautiful. Makes a lot of sense. And so related to that, I always like to ask everyone who comes on the podcast if they have a favorite book or quote or something that you'd like to share with the listeners that's really inspired you on your journey.
I'm trying to think now of
So
a book
many.
to
Yeah.
bring in, but um, for me, one book which is might be a little bit off center to, we'll say, even the conversation here, but I love Homer's poem, the Iliad. which is about
Mm.
the Battle of Troy, we'll say. And the reason I love that book, I think it's one of my favorite books of all time, is because it really takes us into the mind of that time and how they aligned with the perception of what the gods were, we'll say. Because
Right.
the gods being something archetypal, not so much these physical beings that
Mm.
come. And it's just the way that poem. I mean, that poem is it's a book, like it's quite deep. There's a lot to it, but just that expression of how they connect and unify with those gods, because again, different gods would represent different aspects. So obviously, it was a war. They bring in the gods of war to engulf. But for me, that really aligns with, to some degree, with this sensitivity aspect. It's because it's you're sensitizing your entire system and aligning your mind with it to something so that you can invoke an energy, which,
Mm.
if you're having a day when you're down, like just as an example, like, if you're having a day you're down, sometimes I'll use a tarot card of a certain energy that represents something, and I might put it in front of me and really, really
Yeah.
connect with it to give myself a little bit of a boost or a charge. But that
Mm.
book really kind of has a way that it really shows that, because it was written over 2000 years ago, it really shows that this was the way that they used to live that way. This was how they conceived reality around them. And I
Mm.
just find it a really, really beautiful concept of a way to live, and really aligns with the way that I work as well. But I just find it really beautiful concept, the way Homer kind of captures that essence of invoking in energy that exists consciously that we can
Mm.
use to navigate through life, maybe give us a little bit of a bump of energy if we need it, or to align us in the right way if we maybe fall into the mind or the emotions too much.
Yes, yeah. I think that's really powerful, knowing that's possible for all of us to draw on the energies of those archetypes. Like it's available to us all of the time, yet so many of us don't realize.
Yeah.
And it also reminds me, just something else that was coming up through this conversation is, I have a lot of people come to me saying they're really sensitive and they want to reduce their sensitivity. They want to fix it. They want to be feeling less anxious, or they've been told by their doctor that they've got a disorder or they've been pathologized. But I feel what we're speaking to here, what you're mentioning, is the fact that we want to cultivate that sensitivity. It really is a gift to be able to access
Yeah.
this information. Mm.
Yeah, that really kind of strikes for me now, and especially for myself, is because um yeah, like, I actually I have a poem in my first book which is called "The Circle Is Not a Square," and
Mm.
it's exactly about trying to fit into that box all my life, because
Yeah.
society around me said that people are supposed to be this way, and exactly as you said, like, you shouldn't, anxiety is not exactly the condition that we want. Of course we don't want to have it, it's not nice to feel it, but it was
Mm.
like trying to fit us into this box. And I always thought there was something wrong with me, we'll say, because of that. It's like I had no interest in conversations most people were talking about in sports and things. So just, I was just trying to fit into these conversations and feeling so plastic and rigid and all my life. And it was like, if I kept at that throughout my life, I mean, my life was always going to be miserable, because I was always trying to squeeze myself into someone else's reality, you
Yeah.
know. But coming back to myself is to really cultivate what I had. Now, I didn't even know what I was doing for a long time until I started doing this work and it started to make sense to me. Oh, this is, I got to be clearer, we'll say. But absolutely, I mean, I think it's just that fact of whoever you are, and you have a particular set speciality of gifts that you have
Mm.
available to you, that's natural to you. And I say about this work, or we say healing work, is it's not about becoming something, it's about removing everything that you're not, because we've picked up
Mm.
these layers of density that covers what we call in the mystery schools or in the ancients is the divine spark, that part of
Right.
divinity that sits within us at the center. So that's there and that's pure. So we are all completely whole. But the problem is we've picked up all these layers that are not us. Conditioning from society, conditioning from our parents, how we're raised, ancestrally, previous incarnations, you name it, where we and everything and experiences in life, traumatic experiences, they all layer on top of that of who we are. But whoever you are is trying to breach out through that. And if that is a sensitivity or whatever, I mean, I know it can be quite overwhelming, but if you can start to do some inner work, or, reach out to people, and if you can start to deal with those layers that are covering who you actually are, you will actually get more resilient with that sensitivity. You'll start to connect with it a lot deeper, because the sensitivity won't go away, because
Right.
it's the sensitivity. Well, in my perspective, is the sensitivity is you. It's the
Right.
great you that you can actually tap into. But obviously, you want to be able to keep it at some kind of a balanced level. So for me, it really is going in, doing the inner work, creating a lot of balance of the imbalances in your system will get you a lot more stability, and it'll also increase how you read that sensitivity, which will direct you and which will guide you exactly where you need to be. Like I always say about myself is my mind nearly drove me insane most of my life. It nearly
Mm.
destroyed me. It nearly destroyed me multiple times. And now it's my greatest gift. It's absolutely my greatest gift because it's how I read into my body, what my body picks up. And what my mind does is, along when it's attuned with my body, I create images that are not from my physical eyes, but my body creates images inside, which is the language that I read of what's going on. And that only happened through the fact that I was able to kind of balance in and accept that sensitivity.
Right, right.
So I do think anybody who does, maybe if you are overwhelmed, I would say maybe reach out to somebody, find somebody that you can really resonate with or align with for your particular where you're at. Get someone to meet you at that level who can maybe help you, even just get you the first steps.
Mm.
You know what I mean? So to kind of shift that overwhelm and change that perspective of the fact of, okay, there's something here that's really valuable. And it's not just valuable for you, it's valuable for humanity.
Right.
You're here, and especially if you take the particular time that we're at in humanity, we're in a transition. We're at the end of an old age aeon, and we're bracing into a new one. Every 2,200, 2,400 years, we go into a new cycle. And so we require to live in a new frequency of consciousness. And if you're here on the planet at this particular time, and especially if you're somebody who has this sensitivity, you are most likely here to attune that and to be a guide to help others to raise up into that vibration. I really do feel that the sensitivity is people who are picking up in that frequency of consciousness,
Mm.
maybe a little bit before others. And if you are, most likely you have a purpose that's going to help to guide other people's into that range of frequency as well.
Mm, absolutely. I really, really resonate with that. And especially what you said about it's not about becoming someone else, it's about revealing that divine spark that's already in us. And I think that's so powerful for people to realize. It's about peeling back those layers, knowing it's already there. We're already whole and healed.
Yeah, yeah, definitely, definitely.
So thank you so much for sharing your wisdom today. It's been an amazing conversation. And just before we end, is there anything else you wanted to mention? I'm sure there's many things. We could keep talking for hours, but is there anything last minute wisdom you'd like to share with the listeners?
I suppose just one thing, I suppose, is just that aspect of the fact that we are moving into a new aeon. Like the
Mm,
world around us at the moment is chaotic. It's corrupt. It's destructive. It's not a nice place when you look out into that world. But to understand at a kind of much, if you kind of zone out a little bit, is what's happening is that old way is collapsing, and it's
mm,
making way for something new. And what is new is going to be much more beautiful. It's going to be much more blissful. But it requires each and every person to engage where we're going. That the world is the way it is because it's the reflection of the shadow that's inside us showing up outside of us.
mm,
If we come back into ourselves, we'll shift humanity into that level. It's already available, but it's just a case of, come back in and to just do that work. Reach out. There's plenty of help out there. There's so many people in this work, there's so many avenues towards this work. The work will
mm,
get you to the same place, but something might resonate with you more than the next person. Find the right practitioner for you, find the right person, find the right circle of people. There's some fantastic people out there in this world. There's some fantastic people out there doing some absolutely amazing work, really genuine, with trying to do the right thing for people and to guide people through their own journeys as well. So I
right.
do think like that this reality of absolute bliss is it's there, it's available for us all, but it takes us all to engage it.
Yes, yeah.
Mm.
And I think many, many people are feeling that calling, as you said, especially highly sensitive people. I do feel that we're, as you said, tapping into something a bit earlier than other people, or a more subtle dimension of that reality that we're experiencing, and the suffering as well, and the need to evolve and change and move into something new.
Yeah.
And so if listeners would like to reach out to you, or they want to find out more about your work, where can they go to find out more?
Yeah, so the best place for me, I'm probably most active, I'd say, on Instagram. And on Instagram, I'm under Subconsciously Conscious.
Yeah,
A bit of a
beautiful.
mouthful for people, but
Yeah.
But that's probably the best place. On Instagram, I do have a website, which is peterkelly.online. Probably needs a little bit of an update, I would say, but that's probably the best page. You get me on Facebook as well under my own name, Peter Kelly, but Instagram is probably the best place. And as I said, I have some spaces on the school as well, if anybody's interested. I do have some content on Instagram as well, some videos kind of go over that as well, which might help to give people an idea. But yeah, they can contact me directly through any of those avenues. And like, if they do want more information on anything, I have really quite in-depth brochures on any of the work that I do as well.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. And I'll drop the links in the show notes so people can access those easily. So thank you again for today. It's been incredible.
Thank you, Jules. Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks for joining me today on Highly Sensitive Humans. Make sure to visit my website, highlysensitivehumans.com, where I also offer one-to-one coaching for highly sensitive people, and a members area with monthly community meetings. You can also visit the Highly Sensitive Human Academy to find out more about upcoming online trainings, including a 3-month professional training on how to coach highly sensitive people, and a 3-month professional training on working with highly sensitive children. And if you found value in the show today, I'd really appreciate a rating, and you can also support the show by making a donation. Your donations are what enable the production of the podcast and enable the show to keep running.